dear friend, our brother Anthony Aguilar. He's here with us. Welcome back, Anthony.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion today. A lot going on.
Yeah, a lot going on right now. Let's start with what has happened. Today morning, we've learned that Iran has shot 2 missiles at the U.S., warship. And it was a cruiser, or somehow it's bigger than, I don't know, it was a destroyer. It seems that it was a cruiser there and trying to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, which was, Iran fired these 2 missiles that they made a turn and they got back. And since then, we are hearing, new attacks in UAE, in those 2 ports right below the Persian Gulf. It's outside of the Strait of Hormuz. It's in Fujairah, in other ports, then being
Yes.
attacked, tankers being attacked. What is happening? Are we heading towards some sort of collapse with these? Because Iran doesn't believe this is a ceasefire. Iran doesn't believe in a ceasefire. It's some sort of pause on their part. What they're talking about, it's a pause, and any moment that would, the war would, restart again. What are we witnessing right now, in your opinion?
Well, I think it's important to first understand let's look at the ship assets, the naval assets of U.S. Central Command and components of the Fifth Fleet. So geographically, we know that the USS Lincoln Supercarrier Strike Group and the USS Bush Carrier Strike Group and the USS Tripoli Marine Corps Marine Expeditionary Unit Swift Carrier are all in a raid between the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea, and even further down into the Indian Ocean with some of the aircraft carriers and submarines. The United States does not have any ships that are navigating or moving through the actual Strait of Hormuz routinely. You have, the Persian Gulf, you have the Gulf of Oman, and that small 12 nautical mile navigable strip of sea, the Strait of Hormuz, connects the two. But the U.S. naval forces are on the southern side, the Gulf of Oman, which are there Iranian ports and coastline along the Gulf of Oman? Yes, there is. Most notably is where this attack allegedly emanated from, which would be the coastal town of Jask, which is in the Hormuzgan's region of Iran, or the province. And we also know that Iran does have coastal defense systems, anti-ship missiles, land-based, at the port of Jask, in the coastal town of Jask. So, is it possible that Iran conducted a 2-missile strike against a U.S. destroyer or ship, whether it be a cruiser or a destroyer, based on what we know and where it's staged with the Lincoln and its assets? I believe that was very likely. The USS Murphy. The USS Murphy is one of the 3 destroyers assigned to the USS Lincoln that has been in the area patrolling. You have the USS Peterson, the USS Spruance, and the USS Murphy out of the Lincoln's Carrier Strike Group. And then you have the USS Mobile Bay, which is a destroyer out of the USS Tripoli Strike Group.
It was USS Canberra.
It was the Canberra. Okay, so the Canberra and the Murphy. So the USS Canberra is actually from the Ford Carrier Group that has been assigned to the Lincoln Carrier Group in the region. They're all under Fifth Fleet now. So the Canberra and the Murphy were both, before hostilities began or during this period of ceasefire, were both in off the coast of Qatar. So seeing that it's the Canberra that took these strikes means that the U.S. is pushing closer with its patrols to the actual strait. What we know today is that today, the 4th of May, Project Freedom began.
Yeah.
That's the operation that the U.S. announced last night, that U.S. naval assets would guide commercial ships through the strait. Now, what's important to understand is that guide does not necessarily mean escort. Guide can be a series of things. Guide can be radio communication. Guide can be navigational assistance. Guide can be providing aircraft from a ship overhead to help reconnaissance or to help overflight of ships through the Hormuz. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be escorted. But if there is escort, or what we're seeing now with U.S. naval assets coming closer to the actual Strait of Hormuz, the key bit of geography here, the key terrain, if you will, is that this is becoming very similar to August of 1964 in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, that a very small naval engagement, nothing to write in the history books in terms of that naval engagement. But what that naval engagement did do was draw the United States directly into the conflict at scale, hundreds of thousands of troops deployed to Vietnam because of the spark of that incident. This situation right now that we're witnessing this morning and today in the Gulf, in the Strait of Hormuz, is very reminiscent of that powder keg, of that spark, much like what we saw in Tonkin, that can draw the United States in further in terms of having to take action militarily to control the strait. We're also seeing that Iran has struck the UAE.
You know, when it comes to the UAE, it's somehow strange. The state decided to get out of OPEC, and the other organization, they had OAPEC, which is an organization amongst, Arab states. And then they decided to get out of GCC. And they're right now talking about, in terms of these attacks, Iranian attacks on these two ports, they say the Islamic regime in Iran will regret May 4th, 2026, just as Hamas did after October the 7th. That's a promise. Where does it come from, and how do they talk? Do they really believe that they can do something against Iran without single-handedly, and together with Israel they're thinking of this? How do you see that? Let's assume the UAE decides to go against Iran. What do they have to attack Iran?
The UAE has a very effective small military, but certainly not that could oppose Iran at scale. So if the UAE were to respond unilaterally, it would be very limited. It would be a slap on the hand. It would not make that much of an impact. Could the UAE respond symbolically, retaliate limitedly? Sure. But in order to actually have a response that would yield any type of effect or measure against Iran, you'd have to have Israel and or the United States and other allied nations of that would ally potentially Saudi Arabia with the UAE in a larger scale response. So as you see, if the UAE were to respond at scale, they'd be drawing in other nations directly: Israel, Saudi Arabia, the United States. Israel has said recently, moments ago, that they have their intelligence assesses that the U.S.-Iran ceasefire is within hours of collapsing, an assessment that I happen to agree with, and that they have ordered all the opening of all of their underground bunkers and bomb shelters, meaning that Israel is in some way anticipating some type of military action. So does that mean that Israel might be joining in with the UAE for responsitory retaliatory strikes? Potentially. Would Saudi Arabia join in on that because of Saudi Arabia's ties with the UAE, and both the UAE and Saudi Arabia's long-standing rivalry, hatred, if you will, against Iran? Could we see that forming? Absolutely. Would the U.S. walk away from this? If you look at what Donald Trump has posted in Truth Social over the last few hours, it would seem that Donald Trump and the United States could walk away from this. But I do not think that that will happen. We've seen this, we've heard this rhetoric before from Donald Trump. Well, Europe, it's your problem now, or Gulf countries, it's your problem now. And yet here we are, we've stayed, we've escalated, we've increased naval forces to the region. So we are at a fork. We are in the horns of the dilemma. And within the horns of the dilemma, you have worst choices and worst choices. You have bad choices and worst choices. And right now at the fork of that dilemma, this has all of the ingredients, all the potentiality to become escalated, more escalated very quickly. And that fight over the Strait of Hormuz will be very devastating for those Gulf countries that share that coastline. Oman, the UAE, Qatar, Saudi, Kuwait, southern ports of Iran. This is going to become a very dynamic and kinetic naval and land-based coastal fight. It has all the ingredients for it.
Yeah. You know, it's so tricky to somehow believe what Donald Trump is putting out and to find what is the policy, what is the official sort of move on their part. The other point is that he said that we've shot down 7 small boats, in the, which they later on we've learned that the Iranians are denying that nothing of that sort has happened so far. And I don't know how to believe it, because they said that they sunk an Iranian ship as well, which wasn't the case. I don't know what is that. And he said that if Iran attacks American ships, he's going to respond. We don't have American ships in that region. And the United States basically doesn't use the Strait of Hormuz. And what is your understanding of Donald Trump? Can we simply ignore what he's talking about, just looking at the moves in the region in terms of the military, refueling tankers, how they're trying to move the Air Force in the region? What is the basics to understand the behavior of the United States? Because Donald Trump himself is so confusing.
Well, I think that's by... I would say that Donald Trump's narratives and comments in Truth Social and other things that he says, that it's deliberate psychological warfare or psychological deception. But I don't think it's deliberate. I think that Donald Trump responds off of feeling. I think that Donald Trump responds off of immediate response to how he sees a situation at its surface level. In fact, this was my experience in his response to when we were ordered to leave Syria, and then we stayed in Syria, and then we withdrew, but then we reduced, but then we went back. All the same. I mean, this is the same. This is the Donald Trump playbook. So when you look at how Donald Trump is responding to this in Truth Social and what he's saying to the American people, I think that it is much more targeted at the stock market than it is at actually the truth to military action. We're seeing a continued buildup of Navy forces. We're seeing a continued buildup of ground forces. We're seeing a continued buildup of strategic logistics assets such as KC-130 tankers, Patriot missile systems, other type of naval aircraft that support these carrier strike groups, specifically in logistics. So adding to that risk, now not only having destroyers, cruisers, aircraft carriers, submarines, amphibious warships. Now you're going to have a lot of logistics vessels flying, or a lot of logistics vessels at sea in the area, which are also vulnerable in terms of being targeted, because they obviously don't have the level of air defense or sea defense. To Donald Trump's point that many fast boats of the IRGC Navy have been destroyed or sunk in the vicinity of the Strait of Hormuz, either north of it in the Persian Gulf or south of it in the Arabian Sea. It's likely. I mean, that's very likely. The Swift boats, they're not heavily armored. They're not very large, but Iran has thousands of them. And these Swift boats do also carry anti-ship missiles. They carry the anti-ship missiles similar to what where we saw the potential of this, where I was looking at it in terms of on the map, and I think it's since come out as confirmed, where the strike may have emanated from Iran was likely from the coastal batteries of Jask. Jask is a coastal island off of the coast of Iran in that portion of where Iran shares its coast with the Gulf of Oman. So, in emanating from there, we know that Iran does have a significant armament or a significant amount of their anti-ship cruise missiles, and that's their Noor missile, their Zafar missile, their Nazar missiles. And what's interesting about these particular missiles and their capacity of range, anywhere from 50 to 250 kilometers, which more than easily covers the entire Strait of Hormuz, but is that these were designed and replicated from the Chinese version of their anti-ship missile, the C-802. So this is a very deadly, capable anti-ship missile of which Iran has a lot of, but also it's very likely that China has provided Iran with the capability to fire its C-802 ship-to-shore missile, or shore-to-ship missile, anti-ship missile, the Harpoon missile, which in terms of coastal defense and defending waterways are very, very effective. What's interesting about the missile that looking at what likely was fired by Iran and that type of missile, if it was the Noor, N-O-O-R, Noor missile, this missile has what's called sea skimming capability. It can fire direct, it can fire ballistically, it can fire as a torpedo, or it can skim along the water. Why does that matter? Well, because if you're a sonar man or a radar man on a destroyer or a cruiser or a tender or a ship, seeing things flying through the air, okay, that's easy. Seeing things coming under the water, okay, that's easy. A missile skipping over the water is very hard to detect on radar or on sonar because you have waves, you have surface level interference with radar and sonar is always the hardest to decipher. So if you have a missile that has the ability to be fired from the shore, not from a ship where you can see it emanate and lock in from its origin, but from the shore, that can then skip along the top of the water, that can be very risky to naval forces. So, is there I know that earlier this morning, as I woke up, I saw reports that the IRGC claimed that they did fire. Central Command said that we were fired upon but not hit, or didn't confirm or deny a hit. Iranian media has said that there was firing and there was a successful hit. Is it possible and is it likely that the firing of a coastal anti-ship cruise missile succeeded in striking a U.S. ship? Yes. Is it confirmed? Not yet. But as we're seeing the Strait of Hormuz becoming more and more the center of gravity, that's a very congested area. Nautically, it's very small. And you have a lot of countries that share that very specific coastal line. Yeah. So to me, this has the powder keg spark of the Gulf of Tonkin, the alliance formation of World War I, and the modern day tensions of what we've seen in this specific region between the Gulf Coast countries and Iran. All of those things together at this imperative fork in the road does not portend to a peaceful negotiated outcome in the coming days or weeks. I foresee protracted naval war, air war, and potentially the United States exercising the option, as I've said, for potential ground force.
Everything is going crazy right now. Just moments ago, we've learned that missile alert in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE, we had that happening, and the officials in UAE, they're talking about the IRGC will be ended once and forgotten soon. It's just unbelievable, this sort of statement from the UAE. And do you think, let's put it this way, how, looking at the United States today, And if they decide to get back to the war, what do they need, and which would be game changer? Because we know how the United States prepared itself before February 28th. Comparing to that moment right now, what do they have that would be some sort of game changer to change the game or some put more pressure on Iran? Is there any sort of that, in the strategy of the United States or Israel or together with UAE?
Well, we do know that the United States has introduced hypersonic missiles to the region. We know that the United States has deployed more prisms, ATACMs, which, if you consider what the future conflict escalating could look like, I think it'll be less likely where you're seeing Iranian missiles and Israeli missiles flying towards each other, Gulf Coast countries kind of in the crosshairs of radar defense or other missile capability. And we're going to see this really concentrated into the coastal regions of the Persian Gulf, the coastal regions of the Gulf of Oman, and then particularly the Strait of Hormuz. Because I think now that we've, as this war has continued, and I agree with Iran's assessment that there's not a ceasefire. Having a naval blockade, of which the United States has maintained, that's not a ceasefire. A naval blockade is an act of war. So has there been a ceasefire? No. Has there been a perception to say, okay, we're not shooting at each other anymore? And have we seen that the United States and Israel are taking advantage of that time to restock, rebuild, redeploy? Yes. Is Iran also? Yes. So in this round of renewed hostilities, which is very likely, as I said, I agree with Israel's intelligence assessment that the ceasefire between the United States and Iran is hours away from crashing. What now is brought to the table that was different from the previous 61 days of conflict? I think that the strikes by the United States are going to have to be more precise because we are running out of munitions. That's a fact. That naval forces in the region now are bifurcated. You have a bifurcation of your naval forces between those in the Persian Gulf near Qatar on the coast of the UAE, and then you have the rest of the force south of the Strait of Hormuz in Oman, the Arabian Sea, and all the way out to the Indian Ocean, where you have where the USS Lincoln is at sea. You have to connect those two. You have to bring those. It's like the campaigns of World War II, where you had U.S. naval forces within the first island chain and U.S. naval forces outside of the second island chain, and then Japan struck Midway, which is right at the line of the second island chain. Part of the whole campaign was to reunite or link naval forces through that island hopping campaign. Something's going to have to happen to link those naval forces to actually gain a position of military advantage at sea. To me, that looks like at the Strait of Hormuz, you either Qasem Island, you have to do something geographically to seize control of the Strait of Hormuz to have freedom of navigation through that point. That is a choke point. It's not only a choke point commercially, economically, it's also a choke point militarily when you consider naval warfare. So I see all of what we've seen in the news over the last 24 hours to be all of the steps and ingredients towards a resumption of hostilities that will resume much more deadly and direct than what we saw in the first 62 days, as in naval engagements where U.S. destroyers, U.S. cruisers, U.S. Navy ships will be in direct contact, a shooting war with Iranian coastal assets, with Iranian fast boats. Just because these fast boats, don't pack the punch of a destroyer or a cruiser, they still pack a punch with their anti-ballistic missile system capability. They carry those on board. We've seen it. So I think that we're at a new phase. I think that Project Freedom, this new phase of the operation we began today, is quickly going to fall apart. and we're going to see the next military phase of Operation Epic Fury. Based on what we've seen in the previous conflicts, Operation Iraqi Freedom, Operation Enduring Freedom, changing to Operation Inherent Resolve. Could I see this next phase of the operation being called Operation Epic Resolve? Something along those lines, which indicates that we're going to be there a while.
Yeah. Donald Trump is asking South Korea to join the game, to join the war,
Yep.
because South Korea was, one of the tankers of this country was hit by some sort of missiles or drones in the
Yep.
Persian Gulf. Do you see that happening?
I do not see South Korea becoming directly involved with their Navy. They have a much larger problem existentially to their north. That would hand Kim Jong-un to the victory without war if South Korea moved their Navy. Because we've already taken Patriot missile batteries out of South Korea to deploy them to this region. No, I do not think that South Korea will join this war directly militarily with its Navy or its military. Could I see that North Korea would join in the side of in principle or as a supporter of it in terms of an alliance? Potentially. But what do I see them contributing directly in terms of troops, Navy, or Army? None.
Yeah. I think when it comes to the reality of GCC countries, since the UAE decided to withdraw from GCC, from OPEC, from OAPEC, all of this, nobody somehow, you don't see that sort of partnership that we've seen before. Saudi Arabia, by the way, they were fighting UAE in Yemen, in Somalia, in other Libya, they were fighting each other. And right now, that economic ties they had before is just weakening.
Bingo.
And UAE is getting closer to Israel. That's why this UAE official is talking about October the 7th and the May 4th going to be October the 7th, because they're feeling that they're part of Israel, they're part of that group. And it's so amazing. I don't see when it comes to UAE, what is the importance of UAE for the United States?
Well, the importance for the UAE for the United States is one of regional reputation and presence in the region. The UAE is prior to May 1st, when the UAE was still part of OPEC, I would say that alliance and partnership was much more important to the United States and to the global oil market. Not so much now. But that is the risk in terms of, when the UAE left OPEC and went at it alone, so to speak. Yes, their ties are going to grow much more closer to Israel. They need an ally. They need a partner. It's no doubt that the alliances that the UAE shared with other regions of OPEC or other nations of OPEC was based upon their being members of OPEC. Do Saudi Arabia and the UAE have a history of rivalry? Of course. However, there was also a sense of economic ties, at least in that regard. And to the same point, Saudi Arabia and Iran are inherent existential rivals. So the UAE leaving OPEC, could that have an impact on the United States supporting them directly, militarily, or economically? It could. However, because their ties are becoming closer to Israel, could Israel respond on behalf of the UAE? Yes. There then links the United States. So the UAE, the reason the rhetoric we're seeing from the UAE is so closely tied to that of Israel is because it's a diplomatic reach. It's a diplomatic reach without having to openly ask.